Hi, everyone. Welcome to Hardtech People. I'm Danielle Applestone, Fractional Chief People Officer, and Hardtech People covers all things that are people operations strategy for small hardtech companies. Today, I am joined by Pete Frischmann, who's CEO and co-founder of Sepion. Sepion is a specialty chemicals company serving the battery industry. And today I asked Pete to come on and chat with me about supporting your people through the challenges of being at a hard tech company, the ups and downs of growing a company, and how do you really be there for people during that process, which can be kind of tumultuous. So, welcome, Pete.
Thank you so much, Danielle. Great to be here. Look forward to an entertaining conversation today.
Yeah, me too. So, when I first met you, I think the company was maybe 5 people, and I'm wondering if you could tell us just a little bit about how the company got started.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Sepion Technologies is a company selling materials, specifically nanoporous polymer membrane materials, first into the battery industry, and we intend to then expand into other industries that need nanoscale size selectivity, things like gas separation, sensors, critical metal production. But the company was really based on some core innovation that happened while I was a postdoc at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab,
Hmm.
now over a decade ago. And we were working as part of J. Caesar, which was a large DOE supported hub developing next generation battery technology. And my co founder, Brett Helms, had the interesting insight into a class of materials known as polymers of intrinsic microporosity that really helped unlock some special selectivity for things down at the atomic scale. And we had some initial hits in advanced next generation batteries. And then I had the chance to do something called NSF I-Core, which was a boot camp in understanding what customers actually want. And that was a real eye opener for me, learning more about how we might be able to bring some really impactful new materials into the industry to affect climate change, which is what I'm most passionate about, drove me to spinning Sepion out of the National Lab.
Yeah. Um, in that very high risk early stage, how did you find people to come join you before you even had a real company?
Well, at least most first time founders have to have the right mix of ambition, naivete, and some just general craziness and risk tolerance. So I think people that had similar character traits gravitate towards small early stage startups. I definitely had a nice network through the National Lab and through Activate Cyclotron Road, which I was fortunate enough to join in their second cohort in 2016.
Hmm.
And that helped me connect with other like-minded, crazy scientists and engineers and entrepreneurs. And such a strong ecosystem here in the Bay Area of people willing to take risks to do big, important things.
Hmm. Because you have had some ups and downs, and I'm just sort of wondering where you think the best starting point is.
I think just digging into the details is probably better than some grand story arc. I mean, we got 10 years of history at this point, and you know, negative years beyond that, where we were actually working on the technology in the lab. So I
Yeah,
think there's some key moments that are probably most interesting for your listeners, and I'd say we could dive into those.
let's do it. Let's go for the juicy part.
Great. Well, yeah, over 10 years, lots of ups and downs. Maybe I'll start with our first big pivot involved a move away from the application of the core technology for lithium sulfur batteries, which is what we were first doing. And we very pretty quickly realized that in conversation with different investors, different people in the battery space, that in order to build a next generation battery technology company that was going to make batteries specifically, not just part of a battery,
Hmm.
that we'd probably need hundreds of millions of dollars minimum in financing and likely more than a decade of time to get something into the market. And at that time, I was a fresh entrepreneur and I was thinking, wow, that is not what I signed up for. That sounds very daunting. And we were left kind of flapping in the wind of what are we going to do? We started this company, we've got some grants, we've got a little bit of cash, we had a vision that the market's telling us, and I was telling myself, it's probably not the right thing for us. And we had the good fortune of working with a class of materials that's really a platform. And we spent a lot of time with customers doing customer discovery, understanding what their pains were, having, well, let's say, very open-minded conversations where we were willing to listen to people telling us that our tech wasn't good enough and it wasn't going to be for a long time for what we thought we were going to use it for. So I think that's one of the very important points for entrepreneurs throughout their journey, but I think especially early on in a lot of entrepreneurs' journey is understanding and being open to being told that your baby's ugly, and sometimes you have to listen. There's also there's the other side of that where entrepreneurs talk about how gritty they are, and they're told 9 out of 10 times that their baby's ugly, and they stick with it and they win. But sometimes you have to face the facts that it is ugly and you need to pivot. So we made some tough calls and we shifted our focus and battery platform. We've ultimately gone from essentially stepped down every few years from how advanced of a product we were trying to develop. So we went from lithium sulfur to lithium metal, and now we're straight up lithium ion battery products. We've eliminated all market risk and are just focusing on driving these products into the market as fast as possible, looking to start having our products deployed in vehicles in 2026. So we're on that cusp, the early part of the growth phase of the hockey stick. But going through all of that customer discovery, spending the time, having to essentially go back to the drawing board many times after investing, frankly, years and millions of dollars in developing a certain product. We didn't completely lose all of that work because we stuck with the central theme of the class of materials that we worked with. But it's tough getting punched in the gut over and over again for 10 years when you're developing a product and you're working your butts off as a team, as an individual. And so being close to the customer, I think, is really key, and letting go of your ego and accepting that no matter how cool your technology is, if the customer doesn't want it, it has no value.
Yeah. I want to ask about, how do you make that decision to pivot? Like, how do you know when it's right rather than when you should push through?
Well, I mean, there's definitely a lot of nuance, and I'll try to present some, but then also be a little bit black and white. You should always be collecting market data directly from the customers. I'll give a specific example that's been really critical to our success over the last 18 months. We raised a healthy Series A late in 2021, focused on commercializing a next generation battery technology, lithium metal battery. And we built a whole pilot facility. We invested, between us and our landlord, probably over $10 million in CapEx in this facility. And we were making great next generation cells, delivering them to major automotive companies around the world, getting feedback that was quite positive, especially on fast charging performance. This was around the end of 2023, early into 2024. And then some major macro events transpired. So in early 2024, the largest battery manufacturer in the world, CATL, announced a new battery they were selling based on lithium iron phosphate that was only $56 a kilowatt hour, which was nearly half of the price of what batteries are being purchased for in the United States for automotive applications. And then within a month, the largest electric vehicle manufacturer in the world, BYD, announced a vehicle called the Seagull, which for $10,000 got over 200 miles of range and functioned like a car should. It looked like a normal car. So those two things happened back to back, and we were spending time with major vehicle manufacturers in the United States, in Europe, and they were, typically cost was a slightly higher priority than performance, but sometimes certain OEMs might rank performance higher, but they were pretty close in how much they were valued. When those two events happened, cost went to the roof with our customers' priorities, and performance went to the floor. And we had been investing all of our Series A capital in developing a performance product. So we're in a situation where the customers liked what we had, but they were getting us feedback saying, based on what's happening, we probably aren't going to commercialize this technology for another 5, maybe 10 years beyond what they had told us when we raised Series A. And we were also short on runway at that point. So it was very much a backs against the wall moment. And why are we building a company? Personally, for me, I started this company because I'm passionate about doing something about climate change, and I'm a chemist by training. I'm a super nerd at heart, and so I like solving interesting materials challenges to have a big impact. That's what drove me into this business. But also, to have that impact, we need to make money and we need to deliver returns for our investors. So we had to shift fast. And those changes in the market forced us to move to something that there was no market risk. So we shifted to today's lithium-ion technology. We had to develop a whole new product. It was based on the same class of materials that we work with, but a product that worked for today. We had to actually, we had customer relationships, but we had to, let's say, reinvigorate them with the right teams. These are the customers we work with are huge companies with tens, if not hundreds of thousands of employees. So when you're talking to somebody about a next gen product versus a product for today, there's a whole new angle of business development that has to be done, new relationships to be built. And probably one of the bigger changes that we had to make was we had to make inroads in China. That's really where the center of gravity for the battery industry is. And it's also a place where new technologies, at least in our industry, are commercialized 3 times faster than in the West. So we were faced with, I'd say, overwhelming challenges from market, financing, product. And unfortunately, that's the time where we had to go through a substantial layoff. So our investors backed the company, but recognizing that there was a lot more risk in having to develop a product for a different market, for a different application. We were 35 people, and we had a mix of layoffs and furloughs. But on the other side of that event, we were down to 8 people. So that was the hardest thing I've had to do professionally, was to have to look in people's eyes and let them know that, that I know they've given so much for the company, for each other, for me, and that we weren't going to be able to continue working with these great people. It's one of the few times I've cried professionally, was having to have those really tough conversations with so many great people, and just sit in that pain, sit in that moment, and empathize. And
I'm wondering how long did you have to make that decision?
Probably only about a quarter, really.
Okay.
We were getting that information as we were raising a round. And that was also a time where the venture market was contracting substantially. And so, we were out talking to investors. As an entrepreneur, raising money, you always have to be an optimist. So, I was charging forward, planning to close this round regardless, and then support the pivot with the capital. And that just didn't happen. We weren't able to bring in new capital in those market conditions with the story from new investors. And so very quickly, honestly, we were getting the indications that the market was shifting only about 3 months before we had to do the layoff.
Yeah.
We had been shifting our priorities over those 3 months from a product perspective, but then, in the last month where we had to decide, it doesn't look like we're going to get a new lead for this next round. Many tough conversations also with investors. I know this is more about people and team members and how we support them on your podcast, but I think for an entrepreneur, especially a CEO, you're going to have a lot of tough conversations with your investors as well. Everyone hears about the the glory stories where every round is an up round and the company just grows like crazy and then is bought for $1 billion. But the reality is those are few and far between. So uh, the in betweens are there's ups and downs. You're juggling a lot of hopefully aligned priorities, but a lot of different parties that have a lot of potential for their priorities to go in all different directions. And for me,
Oh yeah.
as the CEO, it's all about trying to keep everyone from staff to investors to customers all rowing in the same direction at the same time.
I see CEOs sort of maybe not thinking it through all the way to what's this person and this group going to be like when things go badly. I was running a company that had done very well. We closed our second round 10 days before COVID happened, and 6 months into it, I had to lay everybody off and ultimately decided to give back the investor money and close the business down. Those conversations were really tough. There was a lot of people were disappointed, but ultimately they believed in us and were just really good people, supportive people that really care about entrepreneurs and want to see entrepreneurs grow. And I shudder to think about if we had had some of the, the less people focused investors that are out there, what it would have been like.
Yeah. I mean, every good entrepreneur is told, you hopefully have some good advisors early on, that you have to do your own reverse diligence as well. And having the opportunity when you are getting close to, let's say, getting married with a new investor, that you make the effort to talk to some other people who they've invested in the past and get some perspective for how those investors work in tough spots is really important. We've had the good fortune working with a firm called Fine Structure Ventures for since 2021, leading our A, and they've been very very thoughtful and supportive while also challenging me to make the right tough calls, but also understanding that there are people. This is ultimately a business driven by people. I always like to say that Sepion is not a technology, it's not an application, it's the people, and making sure that you're working with investors who appreciate that if you're not doing right by the people, you don't have a company. For me, it's been critical to making this company into what it is and surviving the hard times, and now really on a growth trajectory. And we wouldn't have been here without high quality investors who understood the importance of doing right by people.
Yeah. How did you keep people motivated in the time where you were sort of larger, you had to shrink down and then really execute the pivot and survive long enough to get to this next phase where you're at right now? Like how did you keep people going in that, or what kept people going during that
Yeah,
that long low period?
well, that's a great question, and I'm sure each Sepion team member might have a slightly different answer, but I would really bring it back to the culture that we had built. And I think this is a fun topic, or well, fun, but also important and sometimes tough topic to unpack. You know, when I started Sepion, I had no idea. I was afraid of core values. I was afraid of the touchy feely aspects of building teams. I was a scientist at heart, and I like to deal with facts. So I'd say that was one of my weaknesses, getting going with the company. I've had the great fortune of working with an HR team member who I like to call her my Irish Army knife, Katie O'Day. Yeah, she's does all sorts of operations things, finance things, but her true passion is people and HR. And I have the intention of doing well and right by people, but I haven't always had the tool set. So she's given me those tools to enact a vision of being very supportive, but also providing a constructive environment for people to be challenged and to grow in, but in a way that they feel like they can take risks and that it's okay to make mistakes as long as we get better from them. And a lot of that was rooted in a really tough time pretty early on in the company where I made the mistake of hiring a pretty toxic executive
Hmm.
and took way too long to realize the toxicity that this person was bringing to the company. We ended up having about half our staff turnover in a year.
Oh, wow.
And when I finally got the strength to terminate this person, I was really left asking myself, well, how do we avoid this ever happening again?
Hmm.
Because that at that point that was the hardest, worst thing that had ever happened to me professionally, and honestly, the things that this person had perpetrated on some of our staff. I was, I didn't perpetrate them, but I was accountable for them, and
Hmm.
that was the first time I had cried as a leader at Sepion. Was learning some of the things that under my watch had happened,
Hmm.
and so I want to make sure that those things never happened again, and that really pushed me towards core values and setting guidelines that we all have this shared language around on how we treat each other, how we look out for each other. And so we ran a series of workshops as an entire team. At that point, I think we were maybe 12 people. So
Hmm.
it was reasonable to have everybody in the room and contributing on working through what are values that we currently act upon, what are aspirational values that we have, what are things that we're doing that we think we should do less of.
Hmm.
And we came up with a list of core values. Those are passion, balance, accountability, inclusivity, and teamwork. We went on to then define what that means at Sepion. And through the help and leadership of Katie, our director of people, really put in place a set of expectations for how we not only have those core values on the wall, but how we actually make them part of our everyday to the point where you don't have to think about them. You're just acting on them. And that creates a really cohesive group of people that can trust each other. You
Hmm.
can have more, you know, people are going to have your back. You know that they understand where you're coming from. You know that when they give you some constructive feedback, that it's coming from a place of care, not from, an ego trip of wanting to tear you down.
Hmm.
And so we invested heavily in building that culture, a supportive culture, but based on psychological safety, based on giving, radical candor, giving constructive feedback to help people grow, but always grounded in a foundation of care. And
Hmm.
I think that that is one of the key things, that culture that we had built that kept the remaining team together over the last 18 months. So after the riff, we had, of course, everyone was upset. There was a lot of uncertainty, and we had to say goodbye to a lot of good people, a lot of friends. But ultimately, the people that were remaining still understood that they could trust each other, that they had each other's backs. Definitely some lost trust in management, and so I did my best to be very transparent about what was happening, why the decisions that were being made were happening. I think that's also always a difficult knife edge for leaders to walk, is
Hmm.
how much transparency do you bring? And I usually try to err more on the side of transparency versus not. I think that's really important, especially in those high stress times of uncertainty. That and our people really believed also in the technology and the product, and we had a strong book of customers leaning in. So all those things together, we had some good base hits early on after the riff with
Hmm.
customers. We stayed true to our core values and got through the toughest times in the last 18 months. To the point now we're just wrapping up a Series B, and we're planning to launch a product next year.
Yeah. That's Thanks so much for sharing all of that. Hardly anybody talks about what it's really like to go through the low times, so I really appreciate you sharing. And I, when you were talking, I was sort of reminded of a time I was CEO of this robotics startup, and we in the end, we ultimately had, successful exit and all of that. But in the middle, there was this period of time where we truly only got down to, 6 weeks of runway, and I had a team of in the 20s at that point in time, and so our burn was pretty high, and I did make the decision to share with people actually, and people had known that I was fundraising. It was a hardware company. I was a first time CEO, and it's just tough to fundraise in that situation, and making the choice to tell people, hey, there's about 6 weeks left, and I have some preliminary conversations, but in a lot of ways, I'm back to the drawing board in terms of this fundraise. And I expected some people to leave, but what happened was they just all buckled down and they kept going and they kept creating new good stories for me to share, like progress with customers, progress with the product. And I think that was the first time that I had decided to not shoulder the whole burden myself, but really bring people in and level with people. And I was totally surprised by the fact that no one left. Everyone worked just as hard, if not harder, during that period of time. And I think it was, I don't want to be too woo about it, but like it was kind of like this collective of energy of like, no, we are doing this. We are doing this. And it lifted me up so much more. And ultimately was successful. I found a lead, raced the round, and everything was fine. But also that period of time where people were like in crisis together and how they banded together made that core of people throughout the rest of the lifetime of the company just solid, where we kind of felt like we could get through anything. And we had, various other downs, but it forged something that I don't think would have been forged otherwise. Are there things that you are focusing on when it comes to supporting your people in this next phase of growth?
Yeah, great question. There's a few stages of a company's life cycle in the hardware deep tech space. In the beginning, you're very R&D oriented. You're always looking for fast innovation. And the next step, as you really start to center in on that product market fit, you're going through more of an engineering product development phase, a bit more, say, rigor and process to how you're doing things. And that's really the process. That's this phase that we've been in now for about the last year. And as we're closing this next round of financing and aiming to launch products into the automotive market, which is a very demanding market for quality, right, reproducibility, and we're really thinking about how do we help our team level up from that engineering mindset to really a manufacturing mindset. And so we are working through what are the changes, the skill sets that we need to acquire? What are the skill sets that maybe there's latent ability here at the team and interest in developing? Some of it, obviously, we won't have the time to develop, so we'll have to bring in from the outside to make sure that we're meeting the demands that our customers have for quality. But I think there's a lot of conversation going on about how do we support our staff through this transition in really company identity. We still want to be true to our values. Those values may need to morph a little bit to serve the next customer, which now is truly, we think about the end user driving a vehicle, as opposed to an innovation team at a Fortune 500 company who's developing a new product. That product's now been baked, and so there's a lot of thinking about leveling up team members with new skill sets, being very transparent and open with them about the upcoming rigors of a launch schedule, of being, when you're talking to an innovation team, our CTO always likes to bring this up. When you're talking to an innovation team, maybe they have 10 metrics they care about. And if you're hitting one of two of them out of the park, you're winning, you're moving forward. And you got to bring the other 8 metrics along. But once you get nominated and you're qualified for that final product, suddenly all the focus is on the one metric that you're not satisfying, and you're always failing until all 10 are satisfied. So really just preparing people for a different mindset where the scrutiny on us is going to be it's going to be exponentially higher. And how do we prepare for the pressure of delivering under those conditions is a lot of the transformation that we're working on right now. There's still work to be done, but I think being upfront, we talked about transparency earlier, being upfront with our team members about the changes that we expect and why those changes are that's success. The fact that we have to do this is because all of your hard work is paying off. So I think really tying people's effort into the change of the future and why that's winning, that's a key part of communication. I think that leaders in situations like Sepion's going from product development into launch phase, have to stay on top of in order to bring the team members along for that journey.
I love your approach of seeing how much growth you can get from the existing team and sort of supplementing that with maybe some hires from the outside with a lot of experience, but really holding dear that we can do this change, we can be the people who are growing, and thinking through what will it take for the team to level up rather than, oh, we've got this core team, we're going to bring in a bunch of people from the outside and they're going to manage the existing people. That's often what I see, but I like that you're growing from within. I think that is the best approach. And like you said, people can do change, especially if you're open with them and you set expectations for what it's going to be like, and you create an inspiring vision, which is what I'm hearing from you. It's like, this is what we're going to do, and it's going to be tough, but we're all going to grow. And that's what it takes to get to the next level.
That's part of why they're here too, right? Like, why do you join a startup? There's different motivations, but ultimately people join and stay at startups because they like being challenged with new things. They like the diversity of opportunity that maybe wouldn't be offered at a bigger company, or at least not at as fast of a pace typically. So doing right by the people and making sure that we're doing the right things for the business to grow is that the work of myself and our leadership team, and we've got great people at Sepion, so I'm confident in our success here in the coming year.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Pete, for the conversation. I'm looking forward to supporting you in this next phase and sending people your way, people who really resonate with the kind of culture you're building. And yeah, I really just thank you so much for sharing your story.
Thank you, Danielle. Pleasure to chat with you.
Okay, that is it for another episode of Hardtech People. If you like learning about people operations strategy for hard tech companies at the early stage, definitely listen in. There'll be more stories from folks like Pete and other tactical things that you can use on the day-to-day to help you grow a strong team. Thanks so much for listening.